Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And I am in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Arthur de Lencquesaing. Did I say that right?
Kind of right.
Kind of right.
Lencquesaing.
Yeah, see, Lencquesaing. So some French people will say this, the que, you're not going to hear the que, they're just going to roll over it.
Yes, yeah.
But it sounds like you'd like to say Lencquesaing.
De Lencquesaing. I've been even myself struggling in saying my name for it took me a long time.
He is the international director for Marqués de Murrieta. Introductions, the rest of the introduction in just a minute. Hey, have a listen to a show I just recorded with the Kaldstups. And after you hear this conversation, you're going to want to hear the Kaldstups. The Kaldstups, a couple who lives in Paris, who wrote the book Wine and War, who discusses Mr. Lencquesaing's grandmother. So you're going to have an interesting dynamic between these two episodes. As well, I had a conversation with John Wilkinson at Bin to Bottle, the most prolific custom crush, which is sort of a word for where you and I can go and make wine together, but is also a place where things like The Prisoner started. So it's a very interesting conversation, a very bright man in the wine industry. Have a listen to those. Please subscribe and give me some positive reviews. If you don't have anything positive to say, keep it to yourself. But welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So the international director of Marqués de Murrieta, but that doesn't even like scratch the surface of what you've done in this crazy industry. Were you, we're going to talk a little bit about your grandmother and her history, because what she did in Bordeaux and your family in Bordeaux. And I actually downloaded your family tree. Is that kind of weird?
Okay, that's kind of weird.
Because
probably I'm going to discover things, eh?
Yeah, or maybe. So your grandmother's May-Eliane, her maiden name was
May-Eliane Lencquesaing.
May.
Yeah.
And her husband was Hervé Lencquesaing.
Yeah.
And then they had Hugues,
which was my father.
Yeah.
Hugues.
Yeah. And then de Lencquesaing, and then you. So was it always a wine family?
The wine side came from my grandmother. We've been 8 generations now in the world of wine, and it's coming from the region of Bordeaux. And this is where everything started. And the first winery that belonged to the family was Château Siron in Margaux. And we were also a family of courtiers, traders in Bordeaux. And then, especially in the 20th century, several other properties were added, mostly through my great-grandfather, the father of May-Eliane, who purchased other wineries, and some together with other partners like Château Palmer and other properties in the left side of Bordeaux, left bank of Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating, because this is, Bordeaux's gone through such major changes over the years. It had suffered through the 70s. There's the war has an amazing impact on life in Bordeaux. This book that we were talking about, the Kaldstups, talks about the Nazi. They call him the Weinführer.
Weinführer, yeah.
The guy that controlled the relationship between the Nazis and the different French wine regions.
Yeah,
I found this to be incredibly fascinating, and it was an accident. And the reason it was an accident for me was I was writing a story about the Artsakh War in Armenia, and one of the first things the Azerbaijan people did was steal the wineries. Mm-hmm. And there were 4 stolen. I had 2 of the families on the show, and I go, what is this about? Why do they do this? I mean, they literally had to leave and were unwilling to take with them anything because they were afraid they'd get taken out on the road by a drone or something.
Yeah.
And then I read your family's story. And your grandmother's one of the few people alive that was old enough during the war to remember. And it's in this book, and it's in her book, which is here.
Correct, yes.
Right? Now, it's in French now, so I have a hard time reading the whole thing. And you did the artwork on this.
I did the artwork, yeah. It's a very nice collaboration with my grandmother that had the idea of creating this book. She had an amazing lifetime in which she was born in 1925 and went through a fascinating evolution of the wine industry. And then from her perspective, from a point of view, from a young lady in the 20s, the late 20s, in Bordeaux. She's been seeing so many things, of course, the war and then the different crises. The 30s were a very, very difficult time for the region, for the oil economy. And sometimes it's quite funny because I meet, of course, a lot of people around the world of wine in different countries. And they always tell me it's fascinating, the richness of Bordeaux and the opulence of those beautiful chateaux, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But those beautiful properties and chateaux, they went through very difficult times. And we see the beauty of those days. But, it was tough in a time. And they had families behind it that need to be fed. And sometimes they were not selling any vintage. In the 30s, you had a series of very, very poor vintages for which you couldn't pay. So if you didn't have solid stocks and quality of wine behind that you could put onto the market, you had to sell your property.
It sounds like today.
It sounds like today.
Is it any different today that how many wineries could suffer through a few poor vintages and not sell anything and still survive?
Yeah,
it's a very capital intensive business where it's tied up.
It is, and there are especially very, very long period. You need to think long term. It takes at least one generation to shift the style of a wine in a winery. Of course, you can accelerate that, but when you plant a vine, before really getting a proper result of good quality wines, you need to wait 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, right.
And then the wines to be ready, etc. So that means the decision you take are for the next generation. And it's sometimes also we tend to forget, especially in the moment in which we live life in a very active moment where we think about tomorrow. Here you think about the next generation. So I think it's a fascinating industry in that perspective. So with all the vision and the discoveries, the meeting that my grandmother had over the years, she decided to write this book. It's called, I will help you on the French, it's called Les Vendanges d'un Destin. The harvest of a destiny,
right.
and that explained it's not necessarily her story, but the perspective of a woman through the eyes of the world and the evolution of the world of wine. And it's for me when I read it first, and my grandmother was sharing with me some of the elements that she was writing on. It was fascinating, and she's been working so hard. I'm not going to tell her age, of course, but she was born in 1925. I'll let you count. I was with her actually last month, and it was really fun because we had a dinner, and we started dinner very early. We start with wine from South Africa. We moved to wines from Bordeaux, Pichon, and we opened several things. We had a lot of discussion about Spain, about Rioja, about Marqués de Murieta.
Wow.
That was, absolutely amazing conversation, and she was explaining me about her first tour to Rioja and the people she met there back in the 70s, 80s.
Phenomenal.
And that was phenomenal. And we finished, well, we didn't finish at 2:30, but 2:30 a.m. I said, Mamita, that's the name I called her. I said, Mamita, it's 2:30 in the morning. I've got a lot of meetings tomorrow. I'm sorry, but I think I'll have to go. I say, no, you don't go. Let's have another last whiskey. And we have so many things to talk about. We didn't talk about philosophy. We didn't talk about religion. We didn't talk about politics. So we talk a lot about wine, but there are so many things. And
that's amazing.
And those moments are so unique. And for me, it was absolutely fascinating. So the next morning in my early meetings, I was like completely destroyed.
Yeah, of course.
But that's such an amazing moment. And the quality of those moments that you spend with someone with such charisma and such vision and such distance on the small topics of our day to day. Sometimes take some distance, take some time, think, and it's just magic. So that's a great thing. And she will be publishing the book in English soon. So she's working on it now. And
she sounds very with it at advanced age. I mean, she's written a book, and now you're having conversations till 3 a.m.
Yes,
I mean, her mind must be completely.
Probably, I don't know if it's the tannins, the wine.
Well, of course we're going to say that.
I think, the reason behind is the passion and the hard work.
Yeah.
I think when in life you have the luck of finding your passion or finding your passions and you want to work hard on it and really push, then I think you've got a great driver in your life. And then when you have that, I'm sure, I firmly believe that you can hold a much longer life.
I think you're right.
Or at least much more intense and live your life.
She writes on the cover page, to my children, to my grandchildren, to my great-grandchildren, to my collaborators and collaborateur and her friends. And the first chapter, the first page for the listeners, discusses how the wine industry is a masculine industry.
Yeah.
And here's this woman who steps into the limelight at Pichon Lalonde.
Yeah.
What was the official, I've always, Comtesse Lalonde, Pichon de Comtesse Lalonde, what was the winery that I had lunch at or dinner at? Comtesse Lalonde? Pichon de...
I think it's everyone as can call its name, the name by what he understand from it. But the official name, the proper name is Château Pichon Longueville, Comtesse de Lalonde.
Right. Okay.
It's Baron, the family of the Baron of Longueville,
Right.
and Virginie de Lalonde was the countess. So it was called Château Pichon Longueville, Comtesse de Lalonde, knowing that from the same vineyard, same estate, in 1850s, it was split into Château Pichon Longueville, Baron, and Château Pichon Longueville, Comtesse de Lalonde. So that's where the difference between the two came.
So in 1993, and I would touch on this story again because I'm so intrigued with it. And my father being a very academic guy, he was a pharmacist by trade, chemist, just very aggressive in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And we ended up in Bordeaux in 1993. I think I explained that at Vinexpo. We were with Henri van der Voort at Chateau Belgrave, and we went across the street to have dinner, and it was with your grandmother. And I didn't realize this literally until about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, when I woke up from a deep sleep and I said, wait, how things you when you're sleeping and you go, wait a minute, what just happened?
Yeah.
And I realized after reading the Kaldstups book that I had dinner with your grandmother. And I remember this elegant woman with a white dress, with an eyelet type dress, and her and Henri were just, bantering back and forth. And it was my parents, my wife and I, and your grandmother and Henri. And it was just a fabulous moment. I still remember it.
Right.
And I feel like I might even be part of some kind of history. I mean, I want to be connected, so it's important. But let me ask you this, because she, in the book, in Kaldstup books, she talks about the Germans coming in, shooting up the pictures, their grease from their boots getting on the carpets and destroying the place, and the occupation. Just for the listeners, when the Nazis came into Bordeaux, they kind of cut it in half, and they kept the good stuff for them, right? Latour was, I think it was the rest home for the Luftwaffe, and they absconded with wineries such as Comtesse de Lalonde. But I had this, after reading this, I kind of came to the decision that terroir does not exclusively deal with climate, soil, growing conditions, picking conditions. How can that experience that your grandmother went through, and anybody else at that time, which you were talking about how tough it was to survive, how can that not roll into what's in the next vintage of wine, from the stories being told, being handed down to you, this history that you understand about Bordeaux? How does that not end up? Is that not part of the terroir, the sort of the winemakers and the owners' outlook?
I think the approach that we need to take in wine is a very global approach, and as you're mentioning, terroir, winemaking techniques, geography are just part of one thing that includes the history, that includes the people, and at the end, it's when you share a glass of wine, you share a moment, you share. And you want to go beyond the elements that are just about winemaking, and I think that's fascinating. And sometimes there is even a spiritual dimension to it, philosophy.
Yes.
There's something that goes beyond. And I love the wine conversation with the different people we get to meet around the world. I've been doing amazing tasting with Marqués de Murrieta to big wine collectors. Some of them were quite older person that had an amazing, extraordinary life, entrepreneur, people with very, very different background. And at the end, you start talking about the wine, and I think this is This has to be the focus, of course, but then it goes much beyond. And at the end, your personal experience that you had, you're talking to me about this meeting you had in 1993 with my grandmother, and that's when you have a bottle of Pichon, Lalande, and then of course you will think about that. And that will help you get those beautiful memories. And most probably your wine experience with the wine that you're tasting of Pichon will be completely enhanced by that.
Why do you think that is? This is a tough question, and I'm particularly trying to pin this answer down. What is it? Why? Wine's been around for 10,000 years, maybe. Armenia, they found the winery 6,000-year-old with shoes. So it's always been around, and it's always, technologically, it's the same stuff as it was then. It's just that we make it a little better and we have more techniques, but it's fermented grape juice. But is it because it comes from the soil? I mean, let's just take Burgundy for a second, which has got this amazing changes in appellations from, across the street there. The wines are dramatically different. Why does that connect us? Why does that create this philosophical approach? Why, when we sit down for dinner together, it always comes back to the wine conversation, at least in our industry, my household does. Even with my best friends who don't drink that much wine, they have questions about it. And those questions are also the ones we have, like, why does fermented grape juice connect us to the soil like this, or to...
I think there's one thing, is that we will never really fully understand it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There is so much to learn. Every time I'm reading about wine, I realize I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I know. That's the problem.
It's fascinating and it's very frustrating. But the frustration brings you motivation to learn more. But you can read in
5 languages.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, learning language, of course, you never perfectly learn and speak a language, but but it reaches a point in which you can have a decent conversation. Right. You can really understand it, most of it. Whereas in the world of wine, every single year is a new vintage.
Yeah.
So you think you know about your vintage, and then you got a new vintage that's starting again. So you need to start again. And the problem is that the vintage that you tasted and you knew has evolved. So you need to come back to it.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's never ending, and it's a never ending thing. And then it's a very dynamic industry. You're talking about Armenia. You're talking about the origin of the wines, the evolution of the wine technique in Spain, in Bordeaux, in Burgundy, the discoveries of new vineyards, the plantation of some very high altitude vineyards in China. All that contributes to the fact that there is still a lot to do. So from a consumer perspective, in terms of the knowledge, that never ends, but also from a production perspective. And we're changing all the time. And now we see the evolution of the climate, and that's got a strong impact on the way we make the wine and the way we question ourselves. So it's a never-ending passion and it's sometimes also very intriguing. It can be very intimidating, and I think from us working in the wine industry, this is also our role to help spread the word. And what you're doing with your podcast, what you're doing in terms of communication, what we're doing at Marquès de Murrieta is trying to get more people involved into this fascinating world. It's
a good explanation, because it is fascinating. I had a master psalm here, and you're starting to get your diploma in the WSET.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah, I know it's very hard. The timing.
It's more a question about the time. I started my diploma quite a while ago. I did half of the exam, and I had loved to do it. I love to do it. But I did it in a time I had a bit more time. And then I ended up with, I had one job and then 2 jobs, and then I had 3 kids, and then I had, so much to do. And now with Marquès de Murrieta, I'm traveling a lot. So you need to make some choices. But I really want, of course, to get my diploma and keep learning.
Well, really, I look at the things and they're fabulous. I have great respect for anybody that's earned their master of psalm, master of wine.
Yeah.
But it's also a platform to learn. Like you didn't see my library, but I've got hundreds of books on wine that if I read them all, we could probably pass the test. At least that part of the test, because you can learn as much as you want to learn. And it's sort of what I tell my clients and my friends, like if you don't want to become an enophile and study it and be fascinated by it, that's okay too. but you can learn about the various regions and understand the value of them. And when you have a good glass of wine, and I have this sort of romantic theory on wine, which is all generations eventually, and that's why it's 10,000 years old and still survives, come to the table with a proper glass of wine, or what I call an honest glass of wine, and realize there's something special about this industry and this thing. And all the stuff that we do, the marketing and the communication, the social networking, all that stuff's irrelevant to what's in that glass when it lands in the glass. And we're going to get to that profitability comment in a second. But going back to the AMW set, what we were talking about, I've had many AMWs here. Peter Koff is one of the originals, and he's from South Africa. He's a great friend of mine. And he's like, I almost didn't have to do anything because I was so versed in South African wines, and they needed somebody to be part of that in the MW program that I almost just walked into it. He goes, I never took a test.
Right.
So he's like, here, you're the guy. So you're gonna be our South African guy. But I had a master som, Emmanuel Kamiji. He makes wine in pure red. I don't know if you know him or not. Great guy. He says, when I took the test in 1996 and I passed the som test, he goes, we didn't have to know anything. We had to know about Bordeaux and Burgundy, and South America was hardly even starting. There's Spain, of course, at the time. But the number of regions that were making wine that we needed to understand weren't voluminous.
Much more reduced,
yeah. He goes, and so it comes back to Armenia. He was having a glass of wine at Daryl Cordy's place in Sacramento, and he says, what is this? And Daryl says, it's Armenian. He goes, oh my God, now I have to learn about Armenian wines, but I got to compete against them.
Yeah.
So, right. So it's a never-ending cycle of things. So were you always destined, do you think? You were 12 years old when, in 1993, you said, when I was there. Were you always going to be in the wine business?
No. So I was really lucky to be born in this environment in which wine is key, and I was getting to taste a lot of wine with the family, and it was always part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You had the wine in the tables, and we were opening very old vintages because we were producing it. So there was not in question in topic of money. We were opening fabulous bottles. But without even labels, and they were torn away. And actually, we had in a cellar in a house in the north of France, we have a cellar, and there was an inundation. There was the flood in the cellar.
Wow!
So all the labels went up.
Oh no! Yeah,
and
back then.
So you just had bottles. We knew because the cases were writing the name of the vintage, and some of the shapes we could find. But sometimes it happened to us to open a bottle from 1921 Chateau Palmer.
Wow.
And that would have no commercial value. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Because that you forget about this topic. And you just have a wine in which you start traveling, and then you open this bottle and you have my grandfather at the time, who passed away in 1990, but was still very young, but I could listen to all the conversation and then all about the stories of those days. And when you hear those stories from people who've lived it, that's just an amazing treat. So for me, I always had that part of my culture. But then I went to business school, and I started working in finance. And I remember it was 1:00 in the morning. I was in front of my computer, and I was desperate to find like €3 difference from a turnover of a few hundreds of millions of euro for the company I was working for.
Wow.
And I was saying, okay, I'm very curious. I love, to learn things, and I'm front in that, desperate, and I've been spending 24 hours, and it's 1:00 in the morning looking for a number that doesn't really coincide. Is that really what I want to do?
Wow.
And of course, there was an internship. It was one of my first internship in finance, and I said, of course, I finished my internship, and I had a great moment in terms of learning, but I said, this is the last time ever I will do that.
Wow.
And I know from now that I will pursue my passion, which is wine. And then I start working for Moët Hennessy for LVMH Group, and then move into fine wine auction with a company called Ideal Wine, and support my grandmother in Glenelly, and then my goal was to come back to Spain, and here I came in Marqués Murrieta.
So that's an interesting path, though. I mean, yes, I have a lot of stories about young people that start out, their family almost defiantly won't go into the family business because I grew up with it. For me, my father had this store, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I graduated from college, and I worked for corporate America, one of the biggest companies in America at the time. And my dad came to me and says, "Hey, I've got an offer, actually, from the South African Wine Club."
Right,
in 1988.
Okay.
It was the South African Wine of the Month Club. They want to buy the company. Maybe you should buy it. And so I came and worked for them, and I had no passion for wine at the time. But man, it didn't take long to understand how unique this product is. And then now it's my life. But first I want to go back to your flood. That must have been the original blind tasting, right? So you're trying to figure out.
But it was really fun because I used to go with my cousin Nicholas, who's now looking after Glenelg in South Africa. And our grandmother would tell us, okay, go and pick the wines. And we would go in the cellar, and we would come back with amazing bottles. And again, without any labels. And
That's so
I
cool.
remember one time we did a war tasting. So we did 1870, 1914, 1918.
Wow.
So First World War, and then Second World War was 39 and 45.
1870.
1870. So there was a few old bottles from end of 19th century.
That's after the revolution.
And that was extraordinary. But we were young, and we were sharing all those bottles with the family, and my grandmother would say, okay, everyone talking to her daughters and sons and even the grandsons and granddaughters, and say, you talk about the wine now.
Yeah, wow.
And it was kind of always a bit of a stressful thing, and it was, but at the same time, it was super interesting.
Yeah.
And at lunch, they would finish.
So maybe that was just
4 hours lunch talking about wine. So.
You're just indoctrinated to it, and you maybe in the back of your mind you didn't know, but you were going to be in the wine business eventually. And it took this computer. There's doctors have come through here, career people that want to be doctors or lawyers, and then they, even Clovis Tétanger. He went to business school, and he was going to do something else. And now look, he's runs the show. So fascinating part of what we do, because it doesn't happen. We were talking about it a bit. These conversations at dinner with friends, with your family, like tonight, we're going to dinner with a couple in our neighborhood. I'm going to take a bottle of Brunello with me. And the conversation is going to evolve around that. You don't have a conversation about furniture. You don't have a conversation about lighting. You don't have a conversation about, computers.
Wine is a trigger.
That's that part you can't put your finger on.
Yeah.
And I have a problem. This is why I do this podcast, and that is the stories like yours. I don't think wine is about swirling and sniffing and pontificating and describing, because I think that's the aristocracy of wine that people get confused with.
Yeah.
But when a novice is able to have a conversation with somebody like you who understands where they're coming from, that's where the conversation goes, and they feel like they're learning, and they want to be inspired, they want to be educated at the same time and entertained, and it's a subject like that. So you worked for an auction house. How long was that?
That was finished in 2018. So I was based in London, so from 2014.
Ideal Wine.
I did wine.
So did it compete with Sotheby's and Christie's and all that?
Yes, it's a very interesting auction house because it's online only. So it's a pure player that started in 2001. 3 founders created this company, and source amazing wine sellers and put it online. And I did one grew, and now it's the leading European auction house.
Wow!
And one of the biggest one. But above all, they offer a huge diversity of wine, and an amazing quality, because the sourcing of the sellers is just so beautiful.
So how did this?
Very varied.
Let me stop you for a second.
Yeah,
I had Maureen Downey on the show 2 weeks ago. She theoretically the preeminent authority on counterfeit wine.
Yeah.
And is now reporting that Rudy Kurniawan, or whatever his name is back in action in Thailand or wherever he lives, and doing the same thing. So at this auction house, for the listeners, how did you verify the provenance of a bottle of wine so that when I buy this 45 Lafite, I'm getting a 45 Lafite?
So most of the sellers that I did wanna is getting were coming from France, all families have been purchasing wines for forever, and that had long-term allocation from the neighbors. A lot of cellars coming from Burgundy and from Bordeaux. So the sourcing, people know about the sourcing, and then after that there is of course all the checks that are made on labels with Mike and with microscope and just to understand, if they can, all the information they have on the labels. There are so many elements that you can chase in a bottle to see if it's proper, genuine or not. But I remember it was quite funny. I remember I think it was Domaine du Carillon in Burgundy, and we had some doubts on some of the bottles, and we called them, and they explained us that they had no idea. They had just no idea. And say, we had those bottles. We had different types of bottles, and they say, oh yes, it's true that we had some other bottles. We have a stock of old bottles. We had no more. We used those ones, and the labels we had no more. So, and we had several labeling.
That's funny
because it's when you had the labels ready with your glue, etc., and you put them, and then you have no more labels, you need to reprint. So sometimes you have from the same winery, and wine has been kept in the cellars forever in the winery, but the label will be very different than the label that was used when it was first released.
Wow.
And that happened in any other chateau, etc. So it's very important, I think, now more and more the wine producers are really taking that into consideration. We are extremely careful with Castille-Guy, for example, with some of our wines that are really collectible, and so that people can know that that they have elements to be chasing, and that's extremely important.
That's fascinating.
That's fascinating.
Actually, what's his name? He was here. I mean, he's literally was down the street. You drove by his house, virtually drove by his house on the freeway.
Who?
Rudy's house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was right here
Wow.
in Arcadia.
Wow.
And when they went into his home, there was foil on the windows, aluminum foil, and then they found the recipes, and there was a little single bottle labeling thing. And so she talks about how they look at the paper stock, they look at the ink, they look at the sheen of the ink. Certainly the glass is important, the cork, what the cork is like. But apparently it's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. Is it obvious in Spain, now that you're in Spain? Are there issues with some of the premium Riojas and Ribera del Duero wines? Like, what's the name of the famous Ribera del Duero?
Pingus,
Sigla.
Vega Sicilia, Castilla, right. Those are clearly wines that are in everyone's mindset for fine wines. Our wines, Castilla, are in many of the top wine collectors around the world. They have that in a cellar, so it's a very visible wine, and price went really high on with such a demand. So we clearly are to be careful with that, because it exists, and so we're extremely careful. We look if there anyone trying to copy the labels, or for now we've been really blessed and we haven't had any. But we keep a good eye on it.
I had a client, one of my collectors. He's like, "Hey, I got this idea. Why don't we get a hold of Rudy?" Which I did do.
Yeah,
and I actually exchanged Facebook messages. And why don't we get him? Why don't we create the brand of wine called Rudy's Fake? Right?
Yeah.
So Rudy's Fake Lafite, Rudy's Fake, DRC, Rudy. And I said, what? He's probably not allowed. He's probably part of his settlement, to get out of jail. But wow, wouldn't that be fascinating? People would buy it just to see what this guy's recipes were like, right?
It's crazy. It's like, it's absolutely fascinating and really worrying.
It is very
really worrying, because at the end is betraying all the world of wine. And
well, one of the comments that she made, we're going to talk about Spain now, but one of the comments she made, Maureen said to me, was, yeah, if you bought one of these wines and you opened it and you weren't happy with it, you would probably just write it off to a bad bottle. Yeah, I bought a 1952 or 1945 something, and it didn't taste like I expected it, but guess what? It's 80 years old, and that could happen. And so you may never know that had a fake one. So with all this history, you were a martial arts. You were a champion in martial arts as well, right?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, you're not very old, so I don't know how you did all this.
I mean, it's about passion and intensity. I've been doing martial arts and a lot of different martial arts, Krav Maga, kickboxing, Sanda, and I just loved it. I put myself into it.
That's great.
In Spain, and had a fantastic time. I keep doing it like 2-3 times a week.
But you got hurt.
Yes,
you were in the hospital, and what I read was that you started drawing. Is this where you found your passion or your skill set in drawing, as that you did the cover of your grandmother's book, or had you sort of been doodling as a child in class and not paying attention?
Exactly. I was not probably the most serious child at school, because I was a dreamer always, and I was always with a pen in the hand, and starting to draw during the classes, and sharing the drawing of the faces of the teachers and passing it, so everyone was laughing until the teacher caught it, and I was nearly fired from the school. Oh. But it's something that I did until I was 18 years old, and then I went to study, and I forgot about drawing. And when I had an accident about 3 years ago, I was preparing competition in kickboxing, and it was quite a severe accident, and I spent 2 months at the hospital.
Wow.
And my wife, and it was in the middle of COVID, so you couldn't have any visits. It was,
wow.
But my wife brought me a paper and a pen and say, come back to your passion. You cannot do anything. I was a bit drugged during the day with medicines, etc., and I was working a bit, and I was painting, and I really start to use it as a great way to escape, from this 4 walls of white, horrible light that you have in the hospital. And I really continued my passion, and I dug into it, and I forced myself to draw at least 2-3 hours a week, and now I want to do an exhibition.
Wow,
and,
that's really fascinating.
And I'm doing a lot of portraits, so I love that. And I want to link that to wine, and I want to do a lot, and I've been starting doing that, some portraits of winemakers, and so I've got a whole list of winemakers that I'm working on.
Great series.
I just need to find the time. I usually draw during the night, and just...
You got a 12-hour flight going home here.
Exactly. So I'm thinking about 12 flights. I think I'll have to rest a bit, because I didn't sleep much in the past 2 weeks. But
so you, with this vast passion for life, really, what I'm hearing, and your experience in the wine world, Bordeaux, South Africa, auction, retail, which is a very important part of rounding out somebody in our industry to understand the consumer side of it as well as the manufacturing side. You end up in Spain, which that intrigues me as well, because I don't know, I love Tempranillo, I love Grenache, I love the different parts of Spain. I've been required to understand it and to taste them. But is there a worldwide acceptance, and why did you choose this family in Spain and Rioja?
When I was in working for the auction house, I was always fascinated by this bottle, Kaldstups.
Really?
For me, that bottle, that design, it was kind of a legend, and I didn't have the opportunity to taste it so far. And actually, when I was in Spain, because I spent some time in Spain working in Champagne for Champagne, and I spent time in Spain, and I was going, of course, a lot out to the restaurant for my work and also for personal leisure, and I was really going often to open bottles of Marqués de Mureta, the Reserva, which I found this wine one of the best ratio price quality. Very well positioned in Madrid, where I was living, and every top restaurant had it. So I could have it at a really, really approachable price, and for me that was my wine. That was and it's a wine I've been really consuming a lot when I was in Spain. And after I went to the UK, so worked for this auction house, and I was keeping in mind the Kaldstups, and I was really lucky to meet with Vicente Dalmau. And in him, I saw a person with an amazing vision. And what you need in the world of wine is people with such driver, with such passion. Someone who inherited a property when he was 26 years old. That was in a difficult time for the old Rioja, and who managed to move this very historical property. First winery from Rioja, move it into 21st century. And what is done in the past 25 years has been absolutely amazing. And for me, the opportunity of working for a person like that was just unique. And I get really well along with him in our first interview and say, you're not going to sign any contract if you don't come to Murrieta. And that was the interview in Madrid. And I say, I invite you next week to Spain. You come to Murrieta and you'll see it. And then we'll talk about the contract. And he invited me to an amazing lunch, probably starting about 12:30. It was with other wine producers and invited me to be part of this lunch. And we opened some amazing bottle. And I was completely fascinated by the place. So we visited the winery. And the place, every single details were there. You have so much history in every single stone. But it was executed at an amazing level. And at the end of this amazing lunch that finished around 8, 9 o'clock, as a proper good lunch in Spain could finish, the contract was signed. I didn't even look at the contract. It was obvious. It was obvious because seeing someone with such vision was for me the most amazing luxury and experience for work. And I've been learning so much in the past 5 years.
I wonder about the passion it takes to do this. It takes passion to be a retailer. It takes passion to be in the auction world. It takes passion to make wine. It takes passion to be the general manager and driver of this vision, because you know that it's going to pass right through your life. You're not going to, the culmination of all your work is never going to be realized by you. It's going to be realized maybe 2 or 3 generations down the road. Telling that story, we were talking about this a little bit off camera, but it's about the commercialization of wine, and we've always had it. We've always needed entry-level wines at the marketplace to get into a bottle of wine for people that don't drink wine. White Zinfandel did that in 1974, got people to the table. We have canned wines now that maybe will bring people to the table that one day will taste a Marqués de Murrieta and go, oh, wait a minute, now I understand what fine wine is, or an honest glass of wine. But my battle is to tell your story. And so the passion just in the way you're telling the story would excite somebody to say, I got to taste this wine. I got to figure out what this is. How are you doing that as the international director of sales? How are you telling the story that you just told me? I mean, how are you getting it through to the people that you need to tell?
I'm very lucky to be in each of the different travels and meetings that we have, of meeting people who've got this interest. So taking them into this world of wine, starting with Marqués de Murrieta Reserva, is the great way to understand the amazing quality that you can get from a wine that, at Marqués de Murrieta is our main wine. This is 80% of our production, and the wine is still very affordable, accessible for such a huge quality. It's a fine wine. That is accessible. And for us, the idea is to start moving the scale so that people can understand then from the Reserva, Marqués de Murrieta, they would move to a Grande Reserva, and then they move to Dalmau, and then maybe in some special occasion, discover the Castigliai. Each of them with a very, very strong identity. And our role in this industry, of course, is to just participate to spread the word. I became in a way like a Rioja ambassador.
Yeah, right.
And coming from Bordeaux, for me, I believe so much in this wine, in the quality of this wine, and I believe that we need to talk more about it and to share that with us. And what you were saying about the generation, of course, Vicente Dalmau, the owner of Marqués de Murrieta, is not doing that for him. Is really thinking long term, and this is for the next generation, not even the one coming, but for 2, 3, 4 generation. Yeah. And he inherited from something with an amazing heritage, and a heritage can be a burden in a sense. But you need, and he has been dedicating so much energy in updating things. He didn't want to leave the winery the same it inherited, because people have evolved, consumers have evolved, the taste has evolved. We used to, for example, just give you an example, in Castigliai, we used to have very, very long aging. 1925 was released after 39 years in barrel. And it was in more time in Bordeaux. And it was released in 1968.
What? I've never
today,
heard such a thing.
It's absolutely unique. So today we cannot do the same. So we are one of the few wineries that release wines after more than 10 years.
Wow.
You know, when we released Castillo,
What's the market for outside of Spain? U.S., U.K., Korea, the Asian markets? I mean, who understands Rioja enough and the best to say?
Much more people understand Rioja more than we think. You know, it's fascinating to be traveling in all those different markets where you understand that there's a big numbers of followers and passionate people and collectors so for Marqués de Murrieta, we are distributed in over 100 countries around the world. So
wow.
Very strong distribution. With each other country, we've got an exclusive distributor or importer. In the case of the US, we work with Maison Marquet Domaine, a very established family-owned importer distributor. And we share a lot of value together with all our distributors. So this network of distributor is completed by a network of distributor in Spain. So with 50 distributors, so 50 in Spain and a bit more than 100 around the world. So it's widely distributed. That means that we have very tiny quantity for each market, which is a bit of a frustration, but that's the law of the game. In terms of the market distribution, our number one market after Spain is the US.
It is, okay.
Yeah. Number two is the UK. Number three is Germany. And then we've got several markets about the same levels: Switzerland, Brazil, China, Belgium, and it's evolving all the time.
I didn't hear France in there.
Sorry?
I didn't hear France in there.
It's quite funny what you're saying, but we are opening the distribution next week.
Oh, really?
I'll be in France next week with our distributor, and we're doing the launch in Paris.
Wow. Wait,
so
next
I'll
week?
be going there. Next week, yeah, 2 weeks, in 2 weeks' time.
Like October what?
The date is Monday, October the 2nd. I think it's October the 2nd. Will you be around?
OMG, I'm there the 3rd.
I'll be there too. We've got a press lunch. We can meet around.
That's so funny.
Yeah, we can meet around. There will be, great wine tasters and press there.
This is so we were talking off camp. We were tasting, and the wine fabulous, and we were talking about the albariños that you guys are making, which the white grape of the northeast of Spain, incredible stuff. It has created mostly quaffable, high acid, just easy drinking wines, and here you come along with this very complex, sophisticated version, and with bottle age, which is fascinating to see. And I told you the story about an Albarino importer who had such a difficult time moving a container's worth, and we chuckled about that. But how is Albarino and Riaxis Baxis? Because I always say it wrong. Riaxis
Baixas.
Yeah, right. That too.
I think I pronounce it well.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm not even Spanish, so. But
because there's wines like what's the red grape up there?
Mencia.
Mencia. Yes, yeah. I mean that's like impossible to sell around here. But Albarino's got a little more traction. Is that like the same worldwide? Is you getting?
It's amazing the demand that we have for this wine. Albarino, so it's a tiny, it's a grape variety from a tiny appellation. It's called Rías Baixas, northwest of Spain. Very different than the rest of Spain, where everything is granitic, is green, very influenced by the Celtic culture. And here you've got this beautiful pergola-driven vineyard. Paso Barrantes, which is the family-owned winery, the owners of Marqués de Murrieta, had this winery for more than 500 years. So 1511 was the Paso, which means Palacio, built. It's a small estate, and this is a fabulous winery. If you compare the size of Paso Barrantes to Marqués de Murrieta, we're talking about 300 hectares, 740 acres for Marqués de Murrieta. It's a very large single-owned estate. And then only 30 acres, 12 hectares for Paso Barrantes. So it's like a garden.
Yeah.
It's a garden, 500 years of history, an amazing technical team behind that really knows how to work with the wine. And we were making a crisp, in a way, kind of simple wine at the time, Paso Barrantes. But making this kind of simple wine, it turned out to be amazingly beautiful when you would leave a few years of it. And we did a fantastic vertical tasting 4 years ago in 2019 with Vicente Dalmau, winemakers. And after this tasting, we decided to stop everything. We were selling the wine after 6-8 months from the harvest. The wine was very nice, crisp and fresh, but we were not respecting the wine. And after this tasting, we realized that something different could be made. And sometimes you need to question yourself, say, things are doing amazingly well. We were selling 240,000 bottles in a few hours, everything allocated around the world. And the decision after this lunch was to stop.
Wow.
Who would stop something that worked so well?
Yeah.
We stopped. We emptied the market 1.5 years without any wine in the market. It was quite tough for me because I had to call our importers around the world and say, sorry, you won't have any more Passabarantes. It's working so well, etc. Say, trust us. There is a vision behind it.
Yeah.
Something special is going to arrive. And about 2 years after, in 2021, end of 2021, we launched a 2019 vintage. And the wine was completely different. We incorporate acacia wood. We reduced the yields by 3. Moved from 240,000 bottles to 80,000 bottles. And the quality was stunning.
Wow.
And now Passabarantes is, I don't have enough bottles to offer to the market. It's a fantastic success. And especially it's changing the mindset of perception of Albarino. So it's moving to another dimension. And this is what we need to do, is question ourselves, why don't we make things different? And trying to make them better, of course.
It's interesting because if you and I were to start a winery tomorrow, and particularly the cost of land and the cost of equipment and all the investment, and we don't get to make anything that we can sell for 5 years besides what we might put in the barrel, we would plant an Albarino or a Riesling or something that is a cash crop that I can bottle in 6 months, and I can start getting some cash flow. But here you are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to shut that down. We're not worried about the money. We're worried about what we're going to put into it. And we had this conversation briefly, and we're almost out of time already. But we talked about it at the tasting room, and that is this idea of taking profit out of the equation. And you used that term when you were talking about one of the wines, to ensure that you're producing the best thing we can do. That is a pretty rare philosophy to say that. And this is the philosophy of this family.
This family has this vision, and Vicente Dalmau is for that really strict to himself and saying, the question I will ask is, how can I do things better? And the means, financial being one of them, will come after. We will see the consequence of that. And he's got this obsession, and we were talking last week with him about, when to release Castillegai. Castillegai is a wine that's been made only 54 times since 1852. It's a wine in which Vicente, together with Maria, the winemaker, decided not to produce in 3 vintages in a row, for example. So we are now with the 11, we will move to the 2012 vintage. And then we won't have any Castillegai 13, no 14, no 15.
Wow.
And we'll then jump to 16. I mean, today, the quality of those 3 vintages were good. 15 was a very nice vintage. 14 was beautiful. But Maria was so strict on it and saying, I've got a bit of doubt. And Vicente coming behind, Vicente Dalmau, saying, if you have any doubt, and if I have any doubt, we won't take any risk.
Wow.
We want to do a wine without any doubt. We want to be 100% sure of delivering the highest quality that we want. And this is our absolute obsession.
No one says that today. I mean, it's almost impossible, right?
I think it's very unique.
Like we were talking about Rudy, according to this woman, somebody just created counterfeit yellowtail. Driving, looking for profit, looking for a way to make as much money as fast as they can, and just moving on to the next thing. And to find this passion and this philosophy in Rioja and in Riaxes, whatever.
Rias Baixas.
You think that after I started taking Spanish in 8th grade, and I took it all through high school and college, and I still, and my French is way better. We're already at 53 minutes, and this has been fascinating. I hope we can do it again. I hope we can do it in Spain one day. Maybe we'll do it in Paris.
You need to come. It's absolutely amazing to see this estate. I was blown away when I first came to the winery, and you need to come next time. We do
we'll do it there.
A show there.
What's the next? we're in Italy next week. We're going to be in Armenia. I'm working with the industry there helping them understand the worldwide side of the industry. And then Paris for a few days, and then we'll come back. And then we'll be back to Monaco
Right.
For the race.
Okay.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
I tell people it's a once in a lifetime, but this is our third time. So, I'm
No,
gonna end
several
on-
life. Yeah.
It's worth it. It's just my wife doesn't care about car racing. It's not the racing. It's just the whole
experience.
ambiance. Yeah, it's the whole thing.
Can imagine.
So I'm going to end on a fun note. The answer to this question, I'm going to give you a question. This is a book written by Dr. Murray. He's a French doctor, the MD, and he. Have you seen this book before? It says the wine is the best medicine. He's a homeopathic doctor as well.
Yeah.
All the answers are French varietals or regions. So you should be educated in that. I'll also tell you that the correct answer has only arrived at 33% of the time. So I'm going to give you three choices. It's kind of like the diploma test or the master of wine test where, yes, the answer is important as the accuracy, but it's also, the justification for the end.
Right.
What was your rationale?
Right,
okay.
right.
So there's all kinds of ailments here, allergies, anemia, bronchitis, diarrhea, fever, whatever. So let's say you had a fever.
Yeah.
Dr. Murray would recommend either a Grave, a dry champagne, or a Côte de Beaune. And then there's also a dosage with this. So a dry champagne, if you had a fever, what would you administer yourself? A Grave, left bank Bordeaux, a dry champagne, or a Côte de Beaune, center of Burgundy?
I would definitely go for the dry champagne.
Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Yeah, I would go because I think the effervescence of the bubbles of it will just make me so happy. And the fever sometimes is a bit psychological. It's not always. I think it's something that you can fight with your happiness and your energy. So I would go
like
for
that. You're right. You're one of the 33%. The dry champagne is the answer.
Right.
The reason doctor says that is because these wines contain, among other things, two important elements for a feverish person: phosphorus, which is eminently stimulating, and sulfur in its sulfate of potassium form, with a detoxifying action. Now, okay, so more fun. What's the dosage? Clovis would appreciate this.
That would go for?
Yes.
I would go with a relatively low dosage. I would go
No, not the dosage. How much should you drink?
A bottle.
You're right.
I need a bottle for that. Yeah.
A bottle a day.
A bottle a day. Makes take the doctor away.
You should be a champagne. There's no longer just for celebration, right? It's actually for fever. Been absolutely.
I think I'll have a Roderer collection 243 or something. I'll be happy with that.
Fascinating conversation, Arthur. Really appreciate you coming in. It's so excited to have you here because we had spoken a little bit on Facebook, and all of a sudden Noreen calls and says, "Oh, he happens to be in town." So this is such a treat for me to have you here.
It was a treatment for me to spend this moment with you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Real
Cheers.
nice moment.
And travel safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Lencquesaing. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.